This footage is the kind of thing that you almost never expect to see. It's so unlikely that this would actually be caught on camera. The drone operator just happens to fly up to film a couple of demolition workers on the roof and manages to capture the exact moment that 29-year-old welder Matvey Kucherov cut the roof suspension joint that triggered a complete collapse of the St Petersburg Olympic Stadium. It's shocking footage, but it looks like something from a movie. It's almost so over the top that it looks like it's not real, like it was staged. But it is 100% genuine footage, and the man in the video, Matvey Kucherov, lost his life that day. So here is the story behind that footage, which stadium was being demolished, how the demolition was being done, and the controversy surrounding the whole affair. The stadium in question was the St Petersburg Sports Arena, which was built for the 1980 Summer Olympics. This stadium, colloquially known as the SKK, was just one of a raft of major construction projects begun in the late 1970s, specifically for the 1980 Olympics. Other notable buildings included the distinctive Bagels, the Cosmos Hotel, Sheremetyevo Airport, and the Olympic Press Center. It was the first time that the Soviet Union had hosted the event, and of course they wanted to put on an impressive spectacle for the watching world. Construction on the SKK began in 1977 and it was completed by late 1979, ready for the Summer Olympics the following year. It was constructed in the typical Soviet neo-constructivist style, but it had a very unusual roof design. For a country that experiences a lot of cold weather and a lot of snow, one would expect a roof that is designed to shed the snow, thus reducing the load on the structure. But instead, the SKK looks to have had an inverted roof design, a bit like a shallow bowl, which would certainly have collected snow during the winter months. To account for this extra weight, the designers look to have incorporated a reinforced circular beam atop the structural columns of the stadium, and the entire roof membrane hung from this enormous concrete and steel loop, attached all around the circumference by massive steel anchors. Now, it's undoubtedly a weird design, but it worked, and its unique look earned the SKK Stadium a place on the French Scientific and Technical Society's list of the top 20 engineering marvels of the 20th century. Once completed, the SKK could seat 27,000 spectators and was, at the time, the largest indoor arena in continental Europe. Unfortunately, the 1980 Olympics ended up being mired in political controversy due to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. US President Jimmy Carter urged an international boycott of the Games, and in response, 65 countries abstained from taking part. The Soviets therefore won almost all the gold medals, and the entire event was one which the Olympic Committee wanted to forget as soon as possible. Nonetheless, the SKK Stadium, still standing regardless of politics, continued to fulfill its role as a sporting venue, hosting regular events throughout the 80s, 90s and the early 2000s. But the times, they were a-changing, as they say, and the SKK, now somewhat outdated and starting to show its age, was no longer the premier sporting venue in Europe. In fact, it probably wasn't even the premier sporting venue in St Petersburg. But the SKK wasn't ready to go down just yet. It was rebranded as a concert hall and became a surprisingly popular venue for some big-name artists. Metallica, Iron Maiden, Lady Gaga, Madonna, Depeche Mode, and a whole other bunch of big international artists all played the SKK. But by 2019 it looked like the show was over. On August the 12th, just one day after a sellout concert given by Jennifer Lopez, the St Petersburg Council announced that the SKK was ceasing business. And without further ado, the stadium locked its doors for good. The sudden closure of one of St Petersburg's most iconic buildings was met with dismay and anger by many locals. There was widespread cynicism that the complex was beyond repair, as officials maintained, and the local council's decision to open up the site to tenders for reconstruction seemed a bit dodgy to say the least, when the winning bid apparently went to some offshoot company who had only one registered employee and no track record of any kind of civil construction work. The sudden mad rush to get the structure dismantled had the distinct whiff of corruption and backroom shady dealing. Local opposition took the form of public demonstrations, including forming a human chain around the SKK, and a local petition was set up to get the building recognised as having architectural significance, but it was all to no avail. By mid-October, a steel fence surrounded the arena, and even though no official project had even been approved, it looked as though demolition work had already begun inside the stadium. Workers were bussed in and out of the now closed-off site, and all members of the public were denied access. Some photographs were surreptitiously taken by some of the workmen and smuggled out, and these photographs showed that the interior dismantling was indeed taking place, probably under the guise of renovation. Huge granite and marble slabs had been ripped out and shipped off at night to goodness knows where. One SKK employee stated, "Wages are not being paid. Uzbeks, the hired workers, curtain off the windows so it cannot be seen what's happening inside. They're destroying everything. Old workers have been relocated to the box office area. They promised to turn off the water soon. They are looking for who leaks photos in the working group. Everyone is being questioned. The hired workers just walk around the premises breaking everything to create the appearance of chaos." There was talk of preserving the main exterior facade of the SKK in order to retain some of the historical value, but the video of the collapse makes one wonder if the idea all along wasn't just to make sure that the SKK ended up as a pile of rubble on the floor. Here's what I mean. So by January 2020, workers had been tasked with cutting away the giant steel anchors which held the huge circular roof in place. Now, I'm no engineer, but even to a layman like me, it seems that without some kind of support underneath, the only logical outcome here is some kind of massive structural failure. On the 31st of January 2020, 4 workmen were up above cutting away the anchors. 2 giant cranes with hanging baskets took 2 workers each up onto the massive circular beams. One worker stayed inside the basket, probably to keep an eye on the gas and the welding equipment, while the other went out onto the beam with the cutting torch and reached over the edge to cut through each anchor. One of the men doing the cutting that day was 29-year-old Matvey Kucherov, and he was supposed to be attached to the basket by means of a rope and carabiner, but for some reason he was not, and this was an oversight which would prove to be fatal. As we see him cutting through the steel anchor, note that all the other anchors behind him have already been cut. They're not cutting through every other anchor, as you would expect as if this was a controlled demolition, but rather they seem to be cutting away all along one side at once. Now as they're doing this, the weight of the entire roof is being transferred to an ever smaller portion of the circular ring beam, and if you keep cutting these anchors away one after another in sequence, disaster is inevitable. As the drone films Kucherov cutting through this final anchor, it captures the exact moment of failure. As the anchor is cut through, the whole roof section falls, and the stress, it's just too much for the ring beam, it cracks and it shears right alongside the stunned workmen. The weight of the roof pulls the still attached sections inwards, and the entire stadium falls like a house of cards. Matvey Kucherov runs for the basket, and he appears to almost make it, but the basket seems to be knocked away as the beam collapses, and Matvey goes down with it. Rescue workers found his body buried in the rubble that evening. Thankfully, the other 3 men working on the roof survived. They were shocked, obviously, but unharmed. And so the SKK stadium went down, as maybe it was intended to do all along. With the old stadium gone, the way was clear for a brand new construction, The shiny new SKA stadium, the largest ice hockey stadium in the world. But to this day, controversy surrounds the destruction of the old arena. Many believe that there was never any intention to renovate or keep the old facade intact, and that the SKK was always doomed to end up as a pile of rubble on the floor once those backroom handshakes had been made. For some, maybe it's no great loss. For others, the SKK was irreplaceable. Whatever your thoughts, the SKK Arena, a unique piece of Soviet architecture, survives now only in photographs, as does the single victim of this story, 29-year-old Matvey Kucherov.